early morning light still clung to the edges of the sky, not yet fully blue. Bare autumn trees lined the quiet streets of Summit Ridge, swaying gently in the cold wind. Inside the black SUV, NPR played softly on the radio, so calm it bordered on sleep-inducing. Lena Harlow, 38 years old, held a steel travel mug of coffee in one hand while she drove, adjusting the belt of her coat with the other. She was used to starting earlier than her colleagues, part discipline, part instinct. Her SUV rolled through an empty intersection. Suddenly, red and blue lights flared in the rearview mirrors. Lena stopped calmly, hand steady on the wheel, though her eyes narrowed. She had not run a red light. She had not been speeding. No phone, no violation. No one else on the road, only her and the officer. The window lowered. Cold air rushed in. A white officer in his early 40s leaned toward the frame, sunglasses still on, expression already questioning. "Good morning. License and registration, please." She handed them over slowly. He barely glanced at them before asking, "What brings you through this neighborhood so early?" Lena tilted her head slightly, pretending not to understand. "Driving to work? Why?" The answer did not please him. "We've had unusual traffic through here lately. People don't usually come through Summit Ridge unless they're up to something." "You live around here?" She did not live there, though she lived nearby and worked for an agency he could not even imagine. On the palm of her hand, her silver ring turned once, a quiet habit to keep herself steady. She had been stopped multiple times already, each time with a different excuse, but the real reason was always the same. She knew this game. Answer too quickly, hiding something, show frustration, aggressive, stay silent, uncooperative. "I'm headed to the federal building on 48th Street, she said slowly, one eyebrow lifted, a full body scan from his eyes. Why would someone like her work there? Lena held his gaze without fear, without reaction. Only a stillness of steel. He asked if she would mind him taking a look inside the vehicle. That question, seemingly harmless, was the beginning of a mistake he would not be able to correct. Lena did not move right away. She let the request hang in the cold morning air. It was not truly a request. It was a test of patience, of fear, of what he might do when no one was watching. She turned toward him with practiced calm. "Is that a request or an order?" she asked, not defiant, simply deliberate. She knew the script better than he did. The officer's jaw tightened. He had not expected her to speak the language of the law so fluently. He glanced over his shoulder toward the back seat, then back at her face as though searching for a reason he had not yet found. "Just routine," he said. "You know, with so many car thefts lately, we've been told to keep an eye out for anything out of place." Car thefts. Lena almost smiled. It was always something vague, always something that sounded official enough to hold up in court, yet soft enough to disappear if pressed. She did not answer. She did not need to. Inside her vehicle, discreetly mounted near the dashboard, a federal dash camera had been recording from the moment the lights came on. She had not touched anything. Standard protocol for internal investigators like her. No sudden movements, no negotiation. Only capture the truth exactly as it unfolded when someone believed no one was watching. Lena worked in the FBI's Office of Internal Responsibility. Her job was to investigate misconduct, often within law enforcement itself. She reviewed body camera failures, policy violations buried in paperwork. She had spent years building cases against officers who looked exactly like the man now standing at her window. Some had been charming. Most had been careless. All of them believed no one was watching. But Lena was not only watching, she was recording. And she was not there by chance. Today she was headed to a closed-door meeting at the federal building. Ironically, about increasing accountability in suburban districts. She looked at the officer still standing there, as though her silence were a personal insult. "If you would like to issue a citation," she said at last, "I will be happy to contest it formally." Her voice was serene, almost soft, yet carrying an unshakable firmness. The officer stepped back, irritated, but uncertain. He did not know how to proceed. He could escalate, call for backup, claim she was uncooperative, or he could let it go and pretend it had never happened. His hand hovered near the radio. She saw it, logged it mentally, and said nothing. Then she reached down slowly, without intimidation, and pressed a small, flat button beneath the steering column with her thumb. A silent ping went straight to bureau systems. Nothing flashy, only a timestamp, a location, a signal that the situation had crossed a line. Somewhere at headquarters, someone had just received it. Lena remained still a few seconds longer, giving herself a moment to breathe. The coffee in the cup holder had gone lukewarm, untouched since the lights first flashed behind her. Her thumb stayed near the panic button, not out of fear, but calculation. This was not the first time she had had to weigh the moment, when to speak, when to wait, when to gently remind someone that she was not just another silhouette behind a wheel. She checked the rear-view mirror. The patrol car behind her had not moved. No second officer, no backup. That meant he was still deciding what kind of morning this would be. Lena's training had not prepared her directly for street encounters like this, but her instincts were razor-sharp. She had interviewed more than 50 officers suspended for misconduct. She had memorized the micro-patterns, the clenched jaw, the pacing, the coded language that always preceded bad decisions. She was not afraid of him. Not really. What frightened her was what he represented, the casual presumption of entitlement, the presumption of guilt assigned to skin before words, the belief that authority needed no justification when no one was watching. He returned to his vehicle and pretended to check her documents, though he had not typed a single thing into the terminal. It was the oldest theater performed daily, unseen and unquestioned. He tapped the trunk of her SUV as though testing for weakness. Lena narrowed her eyes. That casual territorial knock was exactly the kind of detail that never appeared in reports, yet meant everything to someone paying attention. Inside the federal building, they called her Agent Harlow. Her name appeared on reports that circulated to Washington. She led policy reviews and ethical compliance. She authorized disciplinary action against agents who used their badges as weapons. But out here, none of that mattered. She was black, she was alone, and she was in the wrong zip code. She remembered a hearing only recently, when a young officer from a neighboring precinct had defended an unjustified stop by saying the driver looked out of place. That was all. 4 words. Out of place. That was enough. He returned to her window with a thin, smug confidence. "Everything looks clean," he said. But he still had not returned her license. "Just being cautious. You know how it is with everything in the news lately." Lena's voice did not tremble. "You stopped me without cause. That is not caution. That is profiling." "Ma'am, I'm just trying to keep the community safe." She had heard that phrase hundreds of times. Safety was the word they used to justify control. Safety meant silence. Safety meant obedience. And when someone like her did not comply exactly as expected, safety became the excuse to escalate. "Have you seen my identification?" she asked, her tone cooler now. "You have my license plate. You have visually inspected my vehicle. Unless you are going to write a citation, I suggest you return my license." He hesitated. The moment stretched too long. His authority was slipping, slowly, subtly, but Lena felt it. This was what happened when a system built on instinct collided with someone who knew the rules better than those who enforced them. Then, as if trying to reclaim control, he glanced again toward the back seat. "What's that?" he asked, nodding at a rigid black briefcase beside her laptop bag. Documents. She answered Enchapur. He raised an eyebrow. She answered with silence. There was a tension here that went beyond a traffic stop. It was institutional, historical. Her father had taught her as a teenager what to do when the police stopped her. Her brother had not been so lucky. A minor ticket had become an arrest. That arrest had cost him 2 years of college, legal fees, and a criminal record. That was what enraged her, not the inconvenience, not the disrespect, but the fact that this was not a mistake. It was a pattern. Her silence was stronger than anger. He shifted his stance again. Where did you say you worked? Another long beat. Then he handed back her license. All right, he said. But there was no apology, only a sigh. Drive carefully. She took the license, put it away, and did not thank him. As she pulled away from the curb, Lena did not accelerate. She drove slowly, carefully, letting the patrol car shrink in the rearview mirror. She knew he was watching. Men like him always watched until they no longer could. Minutes later, she reached the parking garage beneath the federal building. The gate guard recognized her at once. Good morning, Agent Harlow. As the barrier lifted, she felt her shoulders begin to ease. Only a little. The pressure had not fully left. She parked, shut off the engine, and sat in the quiet of the SUV. She reached for her phone and opened the secure recording app linked to the agency's internal system. She uploaded the encounter, filed it as Unjustified Stop, Suburban District 6A, and added a note. Subject articulated no legal cause. Resisted procedural clarity. Dash camera recording active throughout. She did not need to sound angry in the report. She only needed it to exist, because the truth did not always roar. Sometimes it simply waited, documented, dated, archived, ready. Lena had not planned to mention the stop. She rarely did. Encounters like that usually stayed silent, too small to spark outrage, too common to report. But something about the officer's mocking smile, the way he said, "Drive carefully," as if he still held the last word, stayed with her longer than it should have. She carried it with her into the elevator, through security, and into the glass-walled conference room, where 3 other agents already waited. She sat down, opened her laptop, and opened the file. The video clip was already uploaded, time-stamped, synced to her credentials. The first turning point was not what had happened to Lena, but what she decided to do with it. Later that morning, she sent the recording to Special Agent in Charge, Deborah Hale, with a simple message. Field surveillance incident. Recommend review. Possible pattern match. Deborah was firm, sharp, and, most notably, white. She replied quickly. I'll take this to oversight. Lena answered. I'm fine, just tired. It was not a lie. It was not the whole truth either. By midday, the agency's internal affairs team had learned of the stop, not because Lena had made a scene, but because her stop matched 2 others from the same precinct, both involving black professionals driving through or near Summit Ridge. None had filed formal complaints. All had been recorded on similar dash cameras. Lena's case, however, was different. She was one of their own. And that changed everything. The second turning point came from outside Lena's control. The officer had no idea that his casual stop was about to land on someone ranked higher than every supervisor he had ever answered to. That afternoon, he received a formal contact notice from an agency liaison requesting clarification on a morning stop involving a federal agent. He was told to submit a written report within a day. At first, he did not panic. He thought he could explain it away, call it a routine patrol, a misunderstanding. But when he logged into the portal and saw that the timestamp matched Lena Harlow's license plate, his stomach turned. He had heard her name before, and then he understood. She had been cited in a departmental memo on anti-bias protocols. He paced for a while before sitting down to write the report. He did not lie outright, but he omitted the offhand comment about the neighborhood. He avoided mentioning the request to search her vehicle without probable cause. He wrote that she was calm, uncooperative, and that it seemed prudent to evaluate her presence due to increased crime in the area. Textbook language, ambiguous enough, he believed, to dodge consequences. The third turning point arrived when the footage was played aloud. That afternoon, the agency's internal review board met behind closed doors. Lena was not in the room, but her voice came through clear and even cutting. That is not caution. That is profiling. The moment he touched the trunk, the pause when she refused to open the briefcase, the request for a quick look inside. The review board watched in silence, not because the video was dramatic, but because it was not. It was routine. And that made it worse. They saw the exact moment when unspoken authority gave way to conscious restraint. Lena never raised her voice. She never flashed her badge. She did not need to. Her presence, her silence, her refusal to follow the script expected of her. Those were her weapons. The board made 3 decisions before the meeting ended. First, they would formally audit the officer's stop history over the recent period. Second, they would notify the district commander of a pending ethics review. Third, they would recommend using Lena's recordings in a new training module. Bias in practice. Recognizing non-obvious patterns. Lena learned none of this until the following day. When she arrived at her office, Deborah handed her a sealed folder. Inside was a memo marked, "Confidential Internal Action." It listed her name as field contributor and detailed the recommendations approved by the oversight panel. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "You did the right thing. Silence counts too." Lena did not smile. She did not feel victorious. She felt measured, perhaps a little heavier, but not alone. She set the folder on her desk and walked to the window. Below, the city moved slowly, people crossing streets, buses sighing to a stop, bicycles weaving between cars. Nothing remarkable. But for the first time in a long while, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the right kind of silence could change something. After all, everything had started with a video. But it did not end there. Sometime later, an internal analysis team detected a pattern. Same precinct, same neighborhood, same time of day. The officers changed. The excuses changed. But the targets rarely did. Black drivers, especially women, were stopped more frequently near Summit Ridge than anywhere else in the surrounding city. And none of those stops had resulted in arrests. None had revealed contraband. Yet all were recorded as preventive. The word preventive had become a shield. Lena watched the numbers accumulate on her screen. They did not shout. They whispered, a quiet, damning accumulation of unchecked power. Her case was not unique. It was typical. That was the real danger. She forwarded the report to Deputy Director Langford with a brief note. "This is not an individual issue. This is culture." Langford responded in person. He stopped by her office shortly afterward, leaning against the doorframe as though carrying too many decisions, and said, "I need you to brief Justice." She looked up and nodded. "And not just your case," he added, pointing at the report still glowing on her screen. That was when Lena realized this was no longer a side matter. It was becoming a file with real weight. The Department of Justice scheduled a private policy briefing. Lena was not alone. The oversight committee sent 2 other agents, one focused on behavioral analysis, the other on procedural equity. They sat in a quiet room at a long wooden table facing 4 federal prosecutors and a civil rights liaison. Lena walked them through the footage, not only hers, but 2 other clips showing similar exchanges, different officers, the same language. "You don't look like you're from around here." "Just being cautious. We've had break-ins." She let the silence do the work between clips. Then she pulled up the precinct's stop history, overlaid with demographic maps. The disparity was undeniable. It was math. One of the attorneys leaned forward. "This was never reported to Internal Affairs?" "No formal complaints," Lena answered. "But most people stopped like this don't complain. They just want to get home." The Justice Department representative scribbled something in a notebook. No one spoke for a moment. Lena continued, her voice steady. "This is not about a few bad apples. This is about the environment that tells those apples they will never rot." They asked sharp questions about policy, training, and oversight models. Lena answered each one with the calm authority of someone who had spent years listening to the excuses of men who believed the rules did not apply to them. When the meeting ended, the liaison stood and said, "We will issue a recommendation, not only for that district, but for every suburban department showing similar indicators." Lena nodded. She did not smile, but something in her chest eased. That same period, the agency's Internal Ethics Committee issued a memo. Every officer in zones flagged for demographic disparity would undergo mandatory review, partially based on Lena's recordings. Her footage, once an isolated act of survival instinct, was now federal training material. Meanwhile, the officer's file was reopened. 5 previous stops, all previously dismissed, were now under formal review. The officer who had once smirked at Lena's restraint was suddenly answering questions he could no longer ignore. But the change was not only bureaucratic, it was cultural. Lena began receiving emails, quiet messages from other agents, officers, even dispatchers. "I saw the training video. Thank you. I didn't realize how bad it looked until I watched it again. You held your ground. That means more than you know." Some were from women. Others were from people who had never been stopped, but had always suspected the weight was not distributed evenly. Lena read every one, but replied to only a few. She was not interested in applause. She was interested in follow-through. One email stood out. It came from a black sergeant in a neighboring county. He wrote, "My niece drives through that neighborhood every morning on her way to school. I used to tell her not to move. Now I tell her to keep a dash camera running." Lena printed it and taped it inside her locker, because it reminded her that what happened that morning had never been only about one stop. It was about the invisible script written on sidewalks, in silences, in the way some neighborhoods could feel protected, while others were merely policed. It had taken a federal badge, a hidden camera, and a great deal of quiet resistance to prove what thousands already knew. And still, she knew it was not enough. But it was a step. Lena stood in front of the bathroom mirror that night, tie loosened, jacket still on. Hours after the day had ended, her apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the city pressing against the window. She did not feel like a hero. She did not even feel victorious. What she felt was something colder, something firmer, a sense of moral weight that was finally being acknowledged, yet still not lifted. She replayed the stop in her mind for the 100th time, not because she doubted her actions, but because she knew how close she had come to changing course. What if she had spoken faster, moved more quickly? What if her voice had cracked? What if she had not been FBI? That last question haunted her most. She thought of every driver who would not have had the badge, the recording, or the privilege of being believed. For every Lena Harlow with federal credentials, there were thousands of women who looked like her, spoke like her, lived in the same zip codes, yet never got to file a video, never saw their footage become policy. Justice noticed. It did not always look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looked like a quietly filed document. Sometimes it looked like a new training video sent to 1,000 inboxes. Sometimes it looked like a man forced to rethink a decision he once considered harmless. But real justice had to go deeper. It had to be imagined differently. It could not depend on who wore the badge. It could not depend on who had the camera. It had to be rooted in the very instincts of those who swore to protect. The next morning, Lena arrived early to work. She wore the same jacket she had worn the day she was stopped, but this time, she pinned a small lapel pin beneath the collar. It was not standard issue. It was a gift from a colleague who had watched the recording and simply said, "You reminded me what this is supposed to be." She walked into the conference room and pulled up the latest draft of the training module. Her own voice now narrated the video. Calm, measured. She did not rage. She held the system to account. She pressed play. The screen showed the pause, then her steady voice. It was subtle, but it was a shift. Justice did not roar in that video. It did not arrest anyone. But it told the truth. And for now, that was enough. For now, she was content to know that the next officer who watched the recording would hear her voice before making the same mistake. And maybe, just maybe, that would change something. That would. We tell ourselves that justice is blind, that it sees neither skin, nor badge, nor neighborhood. But what if justice is not blind at all? What if it sees everything and simply chooses where to look? Lena Harlow never raised her voice. She never flexed her rank. She let the system look in the mirror. And when it did, it flinched. This story was never about a broken law. It was about a broken habit. The reflex to doubt, to stop, to assert power when none was needed. It was about the quiet ways dignity is tested, and the even quieter ways people defend themselves. So tonight, ask yourself, in a country where silence is often survival, what does it take to speak without raising your voice?